Yes. So, hello and welcome everyone to the next episode of Around the World webinar series. Joining us today is a science journalist who has experience of over 25 years in science journalism. She is the chief editor of Nature India as well as Nature Global Supported Projects. She has won several accolades, such as Robert Bosch Fellowship, Kavli Prize Media. She is the board director of World Federation of Science Journalists. She also trains healthcare professionals for science communication. So very interesting. That's Dr. Subhra Priyadarshini joining us. So welcome her with a wonderful round of virtual applause. So Subhra, hello. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Ashish. It's so lovely to be here and to have such a cozy group of people to talk to.
Yeah. So my first question to you is, as we are all researchers, I guess. So why should we communicate our research? Why shouldn't we just do research? Why do we have to communicate?
Very pertinent question, and always one that I get when we start conversations like this is what's the basis of us as researchers going out and communicating our research, and why shouldn't there be specialized people just doing that? Well, the reasons to my mind are manifold. One of them is because we all are people working on our individual projects or researches um, where we use public money to get to this research. So it's only nice of us, only good of us to go back and give back to society to tell them exactly what we are working on, what is the kind of research that we're doing. It's not mandatory, of course, but it's only something altruistic that all of us should aspire to do besides just sitting in our labs and doing our stuff. The other reason what that comes to mind why we should go out and communicate our research is because of very practical reasons. One of which is you get to understand where your next tranche of funding is coming from. So basically, once you go and communicate your research to a wider public, it has an impact. And I am given to understand that much of Europe, much of Asia now, much of Africa has a column in its researchers' impact assessment. When you send it back to your funders, they ask in one of the columns what kind of impact your research has had. And if you have communicated your research to the publics, it comes under that impact column and you can actually cite it. It's a very practical reason why you should go out and speak about your research to a wider public, and then be assured of the next tranche of your funding. So there's there's altruistic reasons, more than one. There's practical reasons, more than just the one I've cited. But yeah, whenever I'm asked that question, I generally turn around and ask, why not? And I'd love for you to tell me, apart from what I already know from researchers, the pet peeves why they do not want to go out and communicate their research. I'd love for you to tell me why you think you should not communicate your research.
Yeah, feel free to write in the chat or just speak up, and I could answer that probably because we have to communicate to a lot of people. And that's tiring. So what are some of the things we should like? Should we tailor all the content we have to write, or is there some shortcut we just do it one way that it's applicable to every single reader? How
Yeah,
do we tailor it?
yeah, lovely. I mean, that's a very good way of coming into this question of who is our audience? Why are we wanting to communicate what we are? And how do we tailor our communication for different audiences? So I totally get you, Ashish, when you say that you really have to do a bunch of communication, not just by writing up reports, completion reports, there could be manuscripts you're writing on the side. And on top of it, you're doing your research, sometimes you're teaching, sometimes you're doing outreach, you're doing a bunch of other admin things. And over that, if somebody was to ask you to go and wear another hat of a communicator, that would be tough. But I assume that you already do that kind of communication when you're writing up a academic paper. So that's peer-to-peer communication. It only just takes a little more skill, a little more effort to turn that communication into something that might be useful for a variety of audiences. For instance, if your audience is funders to whom you want to write about what you're doing and why they should fund you more. Why should they read your grant application over other grant applications, and why should they give you that grant? It actually means that you have to have that extra skill to turn your academics, turn your research into something grant worthy. So that is one kind of audience you're reaching out to. And you know exactly as researchers what keywords you need to put in your grant application to make it reader reader friendly for the person who is on the other side, or impactful for somebody who's reading your grant application. Similarly, for communication to become more publicly accessible or understandable by more people, there are just a few tricks in the trade that we use as communicators on the other side of the balance, where we use your manuscripts to write your story in a manner that the publics understand better. So what that's one kind of audience. So when we talk about lay public or publics at large, general public, we mean people who have not exceptional knowledge of science, or people who are not technically trained. So consider somebody who is above grade 8 or grade 10, or consider your grandma. That's the most commonly used refrain in communication, in science communication. If you are able to make your research understandable for that kind of an audience demographic, then you are able to get it across to more people than just your peers. So what I mean to say here is, when you're communicating for your writing a grant application, you're communicating to a certain public. When you're writing a popular science piece, you're communicating to a certain public. When you're writing a policy advocacy piece, you're appealing to a certain different kind of audience. Writing for each of these audiences is not very different. It just needs that very basic algorithmic tweak, if you will, to make it amenable to each of these audiences. So I think we'll come to blog writing and perspective writing later, but what I meant to say is, by just investing a little more time than what you do, you can actually turn it around into something that's widely acceptable and readable by many, many more people.
Yeah, I remember doing a segment like "Teach Me Like I'm Five."
Yeah,
That's like a good way to communicate science.
exactly.
So, thank you for bringing the topic now. Blog and perspective piece. So, talking about that, what is the difference between blog and perspective piece? First of all, are they the same thing or are they different?
They are different. They are different in the basic grain of how they're written and who your audience is. So, when we come to blogs, they are very personal. They can be what the person writing the blog personifies their research, or whoever's research they are going to write about. So basically, a blog is something that comes with a first person account, where you are presenting the science or the research from your vantage point, which means you're free to use a format that is personal, that is told in the first person, like I said, that can use I or we in the context of the research that is being presented. Um, that can also weave in other personal experiences into the story when you're telling that story, which means that, for instance, you work in neurosciences, or you work in astrophysics, or you work in a certain discipline of science which is not regularly written about, but you have an analogy from somewhere else in life that you can borrow and explain your research in layman's term, for instance. Let me just give you an example that makes it easier to understand why a blog is different from a perspective piece. Um, for example, if you're writing about, say, cancer, and you're writing about cell death, and how cell death can be induced, or how particular drugs target particular cells in our body, can be made to target particular cells in our body, and you're writing it from a first person account, and you know of someone who has had a similar fate, or you know a person who has suffered from a particular kind of cancer, and a drug or a treatment protocol has been used in case of that person by a surgeon or a physician, and you have seen it firsthand what happened to that person, how that physician explained to the person or the patient what would be happening during the course of the treatment. You can bring all those elements into your narrative. You can make it as personal as looking at somebody being treated, and what the science of it is on both sides of the story. And you can do a nice amalgamation of both those technical aspects of science as well as the personal aspect of science in a blog piece very easily. Um, Having said that, uh, the commonality with the perspective piece here is that it has to be accurate. So we call this the ABC of science communication, and it means accuracy, brevity, and clarity. Accuracy is, you cannot distort the facts, even if you bring in the personal element, even if you bring in a very sort of people friendly way of narrating the story. You cannot distort the very facts that exemplify that science or personify that science. So accuracy, brevity. Make sure that the narration doesn't just ramble on and on and on to reach to a point. It has to be brief, because we have seen that beyond a certain number of words, people lose track of what they're reading, or they will just jump off onto something else. So attention spans are very limited of your readers. So be brief in explaining the things that you are explaining, but at the same time, make it interesting and presentable, and clarity throughout whatever you're saying. If you are not clear about the things that you are portraying in the blog, the things that you're bringing forth, it it needs to be in a manner that is absolutely crystal clear to somebody who's reading it. One way of doing it is rereading it itself yourself, or making someone else read it before you post. So maybe three or four friends might want to read your blog piece before you post it. A perspective piece, on the other hand, is something that that is written in the format of an opinion article of a newspaper. So the opinion editorial, or something that is led with a topical issue. For instance, um, um, lots of things are happening in sciences in the US right now. And if I were to write a perspective piece around that, I would have to pick up the most topical issue at hand around those topics. And I would have to lead with something that is newsy, that's topical. So, a perspective piece in the beginning has to answer why now? Why are you writing that piece now, for instance? And for a blog piece, on the other hand, it doesn't really need to answer any of those questions of why, what, where, upfront. You can go into the piece and explain all of that, but upfront, a perspective piece is called a perspective or an opinion editorial because it is topical, because it is here and now, because it is portraying something that everybody is interested in reading now. And then it brings forth the elements of ABC. It has to again be accurate, brief, and clear about what it is saying. We can go more into what a perspective piece might entail, but somebody has asked a question about how long a blog piece should be. For any piece of writing on the digital in the digital format, in the digital world, I would say not longer than 800 words, because that's at 500, interests will start to wane. At 800, if you're really compelling, people will stay on. So I would say somewhere between 500 to 800 words is a very good length for any kind of piece in the digital format. If it's a news piece, if it's an in-depth news piece, we can go longer, say 1,000 words or 1,200 words. But for a worldview or a perspective piece, specifically talking about nature, we would restrict it to somewhere around 700 to 800 words. Ashish, you're muted.
Sorry. That's a very good question, Franca. And coming to that, because you just mentioned the interest of the readers will wane at around 800. So now, how do we as writers write it in a way that we still maintain an engagement with the reader to write it if sorry, to write it effectively?
Exactly. So you will see that your manuscripts basically are something that go into 20 pages, 25 pages. Most manuscripts written with co-authorship of, say, 5 or 7 people would be that long, or within 20 pages, maybe 10 to 20 pages is an average manuscript length. Why is that so? It's because you know that the people who will read it will get to the end of it because they are interested. So researchers in similar fields, researchers in interdisciplinary fields of in the area that you're writing about would come in and read your manuscript, um, end to end, because they have something to benefit from it. They will take away something from it. Maybe they will base their own future research on it, or they'll reference your work on it. Um, the same does not apply for popular writing. People come to popular writing or to read your piece because they are interested in it. So the question of how do you hold their interest? They're interested in the subject, the manner or the format in which it's written or presented is something that will either hold their interest or get them away from the piece. So keeping your stuff interesting would require a few skills, a few to dos in your piece, one of which is make it relatable to the person or the audience that you're writing for. If you give examples, analogies, ideas, formats in the areas or disciplines that people are interested in, your audience is interested in, only then can you just bear with me while I close one of the, yeah. So if your analogies, examples, and your narration is something that they relate to, your audiences relate to, only then will they stick around long enough for you to be able to indulge them in your piece. So, like I said, use real life examples in a blog piece. Use the very personal format to engage. Uh, However, keeping it keeping each of those thought bubbles pretty short and interesting. If you go beyond, say, a word count of 100, to address each of the lines of thought that your blog is trying to talk about, you will lose your audience. So keep it brief but succinct. Use, like I said, examples. Humanize data. If there is a lot of data in what you are presenting, you might want to either break it down to talking about that data in terms of humans. So give, like I said, a concrete example from a patient, or somebody who's impacted by that research, or somebody who would be the beneficiary of that research. Give an example and then follow it up with the numbers that you want to bring in the piece. So, for instance, 20% of the, say, world's poorest people suffer from a particular disease. um, how do you humanize that? You bring out one person from that 20% who is a real person with a name, with a condition that you can describe, and then follow it up with that data. uh, Give that story firsthand and then give that data. So humanize data wherever possible, humanize numbers, break down sheets, Excel sheets, into something that's visually appealing, visually more attractive. It could be good old pie charts for some of the stories that you want to say, but it could also be something like an infographic, or an illustration, or a cartoon, or whatever your skill is. Or there are number of tools, AI tools available now, free, which you can use to bring in that visual element into your story. So use those. And if you have pictures, they can tell 1,000 words. Many times, the relevance or interest of a research can be conveyed way more in pictures than in just words. So use pictures to your advantage wherever possible. Yeah, so I think I'll rest there.
Yeah. So we have a question in the chat again. How can we make sure to not lose the depth of argument with such a short 500 to 800 word limit? How can we strike the balance between a flashy narrative and grounded research work?
Yeah, exactly. I think where grounded research work comes in, here in this narrative of popular science writing, which is the blog format or the perspective piece, or even for myself, a news piece. A news piece is even tougher. Um, where it comes in is, if you can describe your research, you always do not need to argue to reach that point of taking your audience with you all the time. If you can back it up with summative statements, for instance, think of the abstract of your research paper. What do you do there? You basically summarize your 5,000 word or 10,000 word research paper in 200 words or 300 words. Um, it is to say that the research, it is not to dumb down your research, or not to present your argument in a more constructive and succinct way, but it is just to summarize. So think of it like the abstract of your paper, where you do not really always have to build towards making a logic. You can upfront talk about the end point of your research, and then follow it up with whatever little is necessary for building up that ground. So think of it like also sometimes I give the example of an inverted pyramid. As researchers, what we try to do is always try to build the case up till the results and conclusion and implications of the research. Think of popular science writing as a flipped model where you flip that conclusion and implication of your research onto the top. You just bring up front that result. You're conveying to this kind of an audience that result or a series of results if you're talking about multiple papers in a blog piece or a news piece or a perspective piece, the summation of all that research, and then follow it up with what how people reached there. So 100 word may not always do justice to um, give that logic or build that argument. But nobody's asking you to build an argument here. It's conveying results in a manner that is understandable by a wider audience is where we are beginning. That's our beginning point. The end point is at the end of 800 words or 700 words, you somehow have to convince the people that you're writing for that what you presented as the result in the opening paragraphs of your blog piece or opinion editorial is something that you have been able to, in terms of ABC, able to produce in those 500 to 600 words. Again, something to keep in mind here is the why, where, what, how, and when of research. So, this is something that we learn at journalism school as science journalists, and it is equally applicable to anybody who's trying to write science in a popular format. So, if you have answered these 5 questions, the why of the research, the where and what of the research, the how of the research methodology, and the when of the research. When did all this happen? And most importantly, in the introduction, the so what of the research, which is what the implication of the research at the end of your paper would be. So if you start answering those questions very quickly through those 500 to 600 words, you will see that it's not very difficult ultimately to present your case or to present a logic which makes sense to a lot of people. I don't know if that answers your question.
Good. So, someone's entering. Okay. So now you've established what to write and how to write, but there's generally one line, your hook line, to grab the reader's attention, which people generally use it on title. So I just called it a clickbait title, but that's just me. So where do you think that one or two lines which grab the reader's attention should go? Should it go in the title? Should it go in the beginning of your blog piece or perspective piece, or should they go in the conclusion and like sort of building up to that, but exploding in the conclusion or
No,
everywhere?
yeah, I think it also depends on what kind of a blog piece you're writing. I mean, I would say that if you're presenting the results of research, which is the primary format that scientists or researchers tend to write about. I see a lot of researchers, taking the other route that you just mentioned, building up the narrative and then telling the story in the end. You may have lost your reader by then. So, what you call clickbait, I would call attracting the attention of the reader. It need not be clickbait. It really need not be. It needs to be just what you think is the so what of the research. For me, in a news piece or in a perspective piece, that is what works. If I'm writing about the results of a research, I would hope for my reader to come to it only if the result is interesting enough. I mean, of course, we can talk about failures of research also, but that has to be put up front. This is where I failed. and that is the result, right? That it's a failed result. So I think without being clickbaity, there are ways in which you can present the results of any research which are which is interesting, relevant, topical, um, talks about um, talks about immediate impact to the communities that you are serving or we are serving, and also talks about future of that kind of research. So all of those are good ways to start. Um, the relevance of the research, why somebody should be interested, why now, why are you writing about this now, what relevance does it have in the wider social context that we live and work in, um, and the implication of the research. Would it impact somebody in the wider area that you want that blog piece to be addressed to? So one way of hooking your readers also is to present them with great visuals in the first go. It always makes sense for me to, if you are promoting your research, if you're writing about it in a blog piece, to have great visuals when you're promoting it on other platforms. So the visual really can be something that attracts people to read that piece also. I see a hand up.
Yeah, Silvana, go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you for your time, first of all. And this is the point that you mentioned now is really what I wanted to ask. What's the relationship, or what should be the relationship of a blog with other media, for example, social media? Because it's really hard for just a blog to be seen, to be known, if there are no support of other media. So how should it work ideally? I mean, I'm obliged to be on X or on TikTok if I want to promote a blog, or there are other ways?
Again, depends who your audience is. Who do you intend to address your blog piece to? If it's for your peers, you could use your internal mechanism or your internal communications to reach out to them. But if you want it to be read by the wider public or people who may not be directly interested in your research or work with you in your research, um, I would say use the platforms that are available to you. And with that, I mean, of course, social media platforms. You are not obliged to be on them, but if you would like your piece to go out, and LinkedIn is a great platform too. It's a professional platform which um, I think all researchers should use to their maximum benefit. I think that a lot of blogs appear on LinkedIn and not on standalone blog platforms anymore. So people write blogs on LinkedIn, as opposed to writing blogs on their, say, WordPress or whatever other platforms are available for blog writing. So I think what I mean by that in a very convoluted way is if you really want to be social with your blog, you have to be on the social media. So, and if you want to use LinkedIn to your benefit, I think it's a great platform for professional conversations and also for blogs.
Yeah, I hope it answered your question, Silvana.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, we have two more questions. Uh, someone asked, like, can you explain what you mean exactly by topical? You might have mentioned that sometimes use the word topical. What do you exactly do you mean by that?
Yes, I meant something that is of current contemporary interest. Uh, mm, and I would actually go ahead and also call it newsy, something that you would read in a newspaper about. So, for instance, we talked about the funding cuts or the goings on in the US right now, and how does it affect researchers. That's something topical. And within that ambit, there could be several other subtopics that are of contemporary interest. There could be the rise of, say, I'm just making this up, um, cases of diabetes across the world, and why as a researcher who works on insulin, it is a great time for you to talk about things that affect a huge community across the world. So that's topical. Um, and something that affects or impacts or is of relevance or interest to a wide community of people and your audience, the one that you intend to address your blogs for. I think all of that is topical. So, what I meant from by topical is something that is of contemporary interest, something that is of relevance, something that answers the question, why should I write about it now?
Right. And another one, how can researchers effectively balance the need for accessibility and engagement on a blog with accuracy required for communicating scientific research?
Yeah, I think um, any scientific engagement, any public outreach of science, any communication of science cannot be devoid of the statement of scientific rigor and the authenticity of the science or its background fact check, as we like to call it. So I pointed out in the beginning the importance of accuracy and factual correctness, if you will, of anything that you put out on any public platform which relates to science. Science in itself is evidence. And if you're talking about evidence and something that is backed by evidence, it cannot be factually incorrect. So I would say, while trying to talk about science, many times we have encountered questions from scientists about, oh, but I was misquoted by so and so journalist. Oh, but what you wrote about is not factually correct or factual. Um, oh, but it takes away from my time and it makes me look like I'm promoting my science if I do it. And my peers think I am less of a scientist or a researcher if I go about tom-tomming about my work. So these are the kinds of peeves that I hear, but they are all genuine. They are all genuine concerns. Um, Many times when we as researchers or scientists fail to convey our work in a robust, simple, yet scientifically rigorous manner to somebody who's writing about it, it comes out as factually incorrect, or many times you might be misquoted. Uh, the onus is on both sides. I think if we as researchers can communicate our science, if there is scope for us to do so, we should, uh, and not fall into the trap of it being conveyed by somebody else. So, what I'm trying to say in a very roundabout manner is accessibility and engagement should not come at the cost of dumbing down of science or inaccuracy in the process, in the system. So when you're trying to communicate yourself or via somebody else, please make sure that everything that the person you have communicated it to has been understood and digested properly. And it can be done if you come from a place of understanding your science through the medium of communicating it. I don't know if that answers your question, but feel free to interject and say, no, it didn't answer.
Yeah, we've received one more question. Franco wants to know, do you have any tips on communicating uncertainties? Because she feels that this is very often missing in popular science.
Absolutely. Um, one reason why misinformation is easy to propagate than information, scientific information, um, is because misinformation generally comes packaged in a very attractive formats and with the certainty of, this is going to happen, that is going to happen. Scientists don't speak that language. And therefore, scientific communication, more often than not, is likely to be riddled with likely, maybe, perhaps, a kind of scenarios. It's not, scientists will never talk in terms of absolute numbers, absolute certainties, absolute situations, but common people do. And people want to hear certain voices, voices that are absolute, voices that can answer questions of um, questions in times of uncertainty. And science comes in when everybody else has abandoned the ship. So, uh, and that it's again another question of trust in science, and it's a bigger subject. But I'll just restrain my answer to telling you that many times we as science journalists also want to corner scientists into saying, can you give us an absolute answer to this or a certain way of saying this instead of saying plus minus so and so, or instead of saying likely to be? Can we make it more clear for the audiences that we want to write for? It's difficult. It is difficult. But we can always hedge. Um, so what I mean by hedging is many times science journalists, you will see, use things like scientists are not yet certain, but they feel with significant amount of certainty that so and so can be a probable future or a probable scenario. So we always tend to say uncertain things in that manner. It is absolutely fine to convey that uncertainty in your popular pieces as well. And it should, people should understand that science can not always have answers in black and white. There is a gray area that science straddles, and it is that your audience should be primed to understand that gray. So you can say science can answer this much. We do not know how science will evolve tomorrow, but today we have answers to this question. But it is likely that tomorrow we'll have these these kinds of scenarios opening up to us via these kinds of science. Scientists are still researching this, and still looking for answers for these questions. So it's okay to convey that uncertainty when you're writing popular science as well.
Yeah, I think Pankaj thanks you for answering his question. And he wants to know if there are any suggestions for blog platforms for communicating scientific discussions specifically.
I have seen that the most well-read blogs are institutional blogs, where your own institution gives you a platform to write about. I have also seen that most times those are the kinds of places that even popular communicators of science are looking for great stories and great ways to reach out to people who are authors of those blogs. So there are standalone blogs, of course, and very popular ones that people take years to build credibility for and years to build an audience for. But I would say a good starting point is your individual institutions, your individual organizations. If you work for a company, your company's blog. If you work for, say, a charitable institute or organization, they almost certainly have blogs, and they're always looking for good people to write blogs, and to communicate their own research or even their outreach programs through blogs. So if you find one such blog to quickly get onto, that's half of the battle won. If you want to start from scratch, I think there are many platforms now, and one of the most well-read ones is LinkedIn, where people write blogs. Now, LinkedIn blogs is a thing, and there's WordPress, where people have very nice formats, visual formats, very nice explainer formats to do blogs. So yeah, I think some of those.
Yeah. So this is a good time to pivot a little and maybe put you in a bit of a tough spot.
Mhm.
So let's say you it's not about just scientific blogs. It's blog because you can write blogs about anything. So let's say you are writing about a topic that you're an expert in, but nobody cares about that topic, right? Nobody wants to read about it, nobody wants to hear about it. So how would you, as a writer, go about it, writing the blog post, but still make it engaging that people are forced to read that? So what would be like from start to end? What would your go through points will be? How will you go about it?
Give me an example of
Mm. Well,
what kind of topic do people not want to read about?
let's say they like America in the current scenario,
They like.
USA in the current scenario, for
Okay, so
instance.
you want to write a pro-America,
Yeah,
pro-US
yeah.
blog
Uh,
piece.
I'm not saying anything, nothing political, but just an example.
Yeah, that's perfect. And um, give me an example of what kind of a blog piece would people want to read right now?
Like anti-America, let's say. Well,
Okay.
so like they're looking for it nowadays.
Okay. Um, so I think in a way you answer your own question. Uh, there are elements of pro-America and anti-America in the same story. If you are going to attract an audience that is that would like to read, or your audience is primarily people you think would like to read an anti-America blog right now, or let's just not get political. Let's just say something that is in favor of researchers, something that is pro-researcher, pro-science, pro policy regarding health and science, pro-diversity, for instance. So those kinds of things is what people would like to read, and you want to write something that is absolutely antagonistic to that view. So your starting point, I would think, is what everybody wants to read about, and build your case about why you think that is not something you stand for. So in a way, you're making it topical. You're making it topical for your own audience. You're bringing in the element that is most read, that might attract attention, but at the same time, you're building a logic of why that should not be the popular theory. Why your theory or your way of looking at things is what should come up. So it's a civil discourse. It's something that builds in point by point rebuttal of the popular notion. It brings in um, topicality, if you will. If you can do it with visuals, excellent. If you can give it a headline that will attract your audience, and yet try to present the other point of view, it works. So in a nutshell, what I'm trying to say is that you can give a popular spin to whichever topic you want to write about. It could be something that is not interesting or relevant, but at the same time, it could, you as the researcher or you as the person who is at the center of that story might want to give it a spin that works for the maximum of your audience.
Yeah, that's good because I've read some answers on Quora. I don't know if you know Quora.
I do.
It's a platform for answering. Yeah, the people write their answers in a very satirical format. So that's another thing that I found quite interesting. So now coming to editing part. So because of course you everyone for blog writing having a unique voice is very important because that is your USP, I think, while blog writing. But as an editor, how do you not edit it in a way that it's reflecting your voice, but still keeping the voice of the writer?
For a blog piece, yes.
Yeah.
Um,
Or even for a perspective piece, I'm sure you have edited several in your lifetime. So how do
yeah.
you do that?
So I'll come from the point of view of a worldview piece or a perspective piece or an opinion editorial. Uh, In the name itself, you're calling it opinion. So it has to be opinionated. It has to be something that has a lot of you in the narrative. But at the same time, your opinion on a specific topic is what it is about. It is not about just you, but you plus the subject. Um, a very fair balance between these two is what I would say makes for a good blog piece. So, as the writer of an opinion editorial, there are things that we try to um, tell the person we commission such a piece uh, at the at the outset, and some of those things are one, very essential is the topicality. I keep coming back to it over and over again because that is something that will get picked by your audiences. If it is topical to them, if it is something that they would leave everything else to read, uh, I think that is the number one hit point for a piece of that nature. Um, Apart from that, I would think things like the relevance of that research alongside your own perspective of that research, weaving a weaving a nice balance between these two would merit treading with utmost caution about not bridging that, not crossing that line of it being just about you, but also about the topic that you're writing about. So, for instance, you're writing about a new find in the closest galaxy to Earth, astrophysics. But how you came to make that discovery, um, and how you, among various other astronomers or astrophysicists who were working on that project, were the first to look through a variety of satellite images or whatever you were working on to come to that eureka moment. So, like you said, uniqueness of the voice is super important for a blog piece, but at the same time, uniqueness of the research at hand or the work at hand is also super important. And I would say a lovely balance between these two is what would make for a lovely blog.
Yeah. And how would you go on to measure the success of a blog post like after it's published? Are there any indicators one should keep an eye on? Because in research publications we have citations, but in blog posts we have only reads. Is it the success indicator?
Well, it's very tough um, to navigate the space. A reason why at nature.com we do not have a blog platform anymore. Um, the it's the same with podcasts. If you ask me, it's very difficult to get analytics for podcasts. It's equally difficult to get analytics I mean, you can judge it by the number of hits your website has had, but that's no indication that people engaged with that story or that piece. So it's tough to get analytics, but I would say for me, if it is the the engagement that you get on a secondary platform, which is, say, you'd get a very limited number of responses to your any of the blogs you write. So somebody might come and say, oh, lovely topic, or somebody might come and say, oh, I have a similar experience. But that's it, it would be very limited. So I think one way of measuring success is, again, I'm coming back to the social media platforms, is when you can portray or analyze what kind of comments you had when you posted it on social media, and use that as an analytic or a metric of how successful your blog piece was to engage people with the topic itself, with the subject itself. They may not have read the whole thing, they may not have read beyond 200 words, they may not even have clicked on to go to your blog piece. But if you have engaged them, if you have networked with a number of people, if somebody came in and said, oh, I'd like to collaborate on that topic with you, do you think that works? I would say, um, you know non-tangible or non-measurable impacts like those would also mean something for engagement, or should be quantified when you yourself measure how much impact your blog piece had. So if I were to make a Excel sheet out of my impact, or assess my impact on a blog piece that I wrote, I would perhaps keep all these columns of intangible public outreach or networking or engagement on social media that I had, or potential collaboration leads that I got in that Excel sheet.
That's really great. And does anyone have any more questions since we are reaching the closing time? No? So I would ask some just concluding question that, so do you have any favorite perspective piece or blog post for inspiring the new bloggers? And also, if someone is unsure about their blogging journey and is feeling the jitters to start their first blog, do you have any advice for them?
I had a counter question actually, which I thought I would ask at some point during our conversation today, is what brings you to blogs? I mean, what was the thought behind having a blog platform? Have you measured success? Have you had success? Have you seen how it is doing within your small research community or within the larger alumni association community?
Well, that's a difficult question, but yes, we have had some success. But the main idea was, what I think was, because blogs give people freedom to write about whatever they want to write without being restricted. You have to write about a certain topic for certain research papers. No, blog gives you freedom to write about anything. And B, the language is not a big barrier. You can write in any language, even though most people prefer English. And as Pankaj said, accessibility is quick. People can read it, and it's short to deal with the short attention span of the people. So I think these were some of the things that I think why we started writing blog or have this dedicated channel blogs. I don't know if anyone else would like to comment on this as well.
Her hand up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I jump in, Ashish?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So I can share my story because I think that it's connected to how to measure the success. And I can share that I never wrote a blog before September 2023, but I had my own website. And then before starting my Marie Curie project, that was the only critique, kind of, oh, maybe you could communicate your research better. or like having like yeah, that was in the feedback. So I decided to start a blog, and then about once a month I really posted just lots of pictures and kind of what I'm doing, but also how this relates to my research. And the idea was also like I moved from Vienna to Chicago, so I didn't want to like update my friends all the time. So I'm like, okay, you can just like read the blog, you know. And what happened to me was like I went to conferences then to Europe in the summer. So it's been like 1 year that I was away, and a lot of people would approach me and say, hey, it looks like your project is doing really well, and yeah, we really enjoy like reading it. And I was like, okay, I mean, I'm happy if, you know. And that was my feedback. So it wasn't like the number of clicks, but people would say, hey, I read your blog, or like I would get this kind of messages, and I'm like, okay, yeah. So it wasn't scientific, maybe measurable output, but more like a friend circle as well. And or like not friend circle, but also people who are in the same field and would kind of learn about my project through my blog and not necessarily through publication.
No, that's exactly what Shubhra said. Intangible
Yeah.
impact outcome. Yeah.
Oh, that's absolutely how I hear a lot of bloggers talk about what they do, and I'm going beyond the scientific research community actually. And the best blogs are in the travel or food uh, category, right? That's what takes all of us our fancy. And uh, I mean, I have read some really exciting ones in those genres. I've read some nice ones in India. Um, I mean, like I said, I used to love the nature blog platform where people could come and just anybody could come and say, "Hey, can I write a blog for you?" And we would say, why not? Of course you can, and this is how you should write about it. Let's talk about what are the kinds of things that our audience might want to read, and let's tailor our blog according to that. So I miss our blog platform because it did, like Pankaj mentioned, the quick accessibility to everybody to read what's happening in the lives of other researchers. We used to have blog series. For instance, we had one series called Away from Home, where we used to have diaspora Indian scientists in working in various parts of the world, the challenges they face, the kinds of problems they have, the kinds of cultural barriers they face when they go to a new country to do their PhDs or postdocs, or what kinds of unique uh, things they bring as Indian researchers to the labs that they work in, etc. So it was a hugely popular blog series, primarily because it really had that unique, direct personal connect with a whole lot of people back in India, and people wanted to read about what you miss when you're out of India, what kind of things like those. So what are the visa processes, for instance, for researchers going to certain countries, etc. So I think careers are one area that, Ashish, we also talked about this, that are read about a lot these days. Scientific careers, like Sabina mentioned, what she does in her own career, what just updating friends about what's exciting in her lab or in her work. And similarly, people want to read those small, incremental, exciting things from your daily life. So I think that's one not enough written. I see a lot of geoscientists doing that because they go out into the field, do these archaeology digs and find stuff and come back and put those pictures. Hey, look what I found, and fossils and all that exciting stuff. But yeah, I see a lot of geoscientists chronicling their life on their blogs and on social media, and getting a lot of hits and a lot of engagement. So I think chronicling your research life is one thing to do, day to day lives, challenges, excitements, eureka moments which come once in 10 years maybe. but still those moments, and careers. So if you want to excite people who want to come into the kind of career that you have taken on, so that's also a way of engaging a lot of youngsters who would like some mentorship, some direction, some way to define their own journeys, their futures, looking for career advice. That's also another strand to look for engaging content, I think. Did we go too far away from what you asked me, or are we?
No, I don't think so, but you could still answer the question, which was, what are some tips you would recommend to a budding blog writer or person who is just starting to write their first blog? But before that, I would also like to add the comment from my experience why I started blogging. It was a way to improve my written communication skills beyond just writing for papers, which are research papers. So I just wanted to improve writing. I started taking blog notes from the any webinars that I attend. Then I would do some research, add my own ideas and conclusions, and write a blog post, draft a blog post. And the former chair who would edit my blogs and publish them, that encouraged me to write another one and another one. And now I'm the chair of the communication working group because got so interested into it. So it's also does that. It also generates interest to improve people. So that was another reason.
Exactly. That's really something that you can call tangible. So yeah, it did take you where you wanted to. And I would say that, um, keeping in mind very basics of clear and concise writing. Writing simple English is the toughest. You can amble on, you can make, um, sort of flowery language, bring in all your literary, sort of ace your literary side, and yet not get too many readers. That's simply because writing simple is the toughest. And also writing simple is what will get you the most audiences. So I would say, as a rule of thumb, um, start by writing small sentences, which would mean that each of your sentence should ideally not go beyond 12 to 14 words. Um, if it can be contained in that, excellent. If it really needs to go beyond that, well, of course it will. If you haven't read Shrunk and White, The Elements of Style, it's a freely available 100-year-old book which works even today, by Shrunk and White. It's called Elements of Style. You can freely download a PDF if you just search on the net. Um, it's a beautiful book about how to write concisely and effectively. Very quick to read as well. So some style elements are good to have in order to not labor your audiences too much. Um, I would say the other thing that I recommend all writers is to read copiously. So if you want to be a good perspective writer or author of a book, a novel, read 10 perspective pieces or read 10 novels of the genre that you want to write in. And you'll quickly see how reading really improves your writing. The more you read, the better you write, is a buzz word in writing circles, and I have benefited myself from that immensely. Um, the other and very obvious thing to say is to um, reread whatever you've written. So you will see that when you've written a sentence that's 25 words long or 30 words long, you can, after the second or third read, you can very easily break that into two sentences. and make each sentence 12 words, 13 words long. And it's possible only when you're rereading what you're writing. So whenever you have a draft ready, keep some time for at least rereading it 2 or 3 times before sending it out to whoever you are sending it to edit it or publish it. I would also say read it out aloud, not in your mind. And you will see where the stumbling block is when you read it out aloud. So all of this is in elements of style. So I'm not saying anything that's purely copyright me. I think one graduation that I think good blog writers should aim to aspire to get to is writing a good opinion editorial or perspective piece. And I see that all of you are interested in writing, all of you are interested in writing blogs. I've seen a lot of good blog writers do excellent in terms of writing wider popular pieces for as perspective pieces, and I'd highly recommend that to all of you. I'm happy and open to get pitches for editorial writing at Nature India or the wider Nature platform. If you have something in mind, don't hesitate to hit me up with it.
Thank you so much, Subhra. And with that, I would like to thank you and thank you everyone for joining us today. And I hope you enjoyed it. And thank you again, Subhra, for imparting us with the knowledge and sharing your experiences. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I've learned so much myself. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for